I'm very happy to report that the Rivian R2 appears to be on schedule because more and more production intent vehicles are being spotted, and at least according to Rivian's own social media, there's quite a bit of them. They're saying there's hundreds of them on the road getting real world data collection now, final testing and calibration to kind of make some of those minute details, and even DC fast charging, which is a pretty important detail. It implies that Rivian is already in early talks with Tesla so they can test and calibrate how the R2 does at even V3 superchargers, it looks like, which is pretty much the most commonplace, most affordable, most reliable DC fast charging in the country. So I got really excited to see this, especially the relocated charge port location, which means, especially with the plug-in charge functionality we already know that R1 vehicles are capable of, the R2 should be extremely easy to road trip with. Rivian's got some great navigation and route planning software, so you'll just be able to plug in any destination. It'll route you to the most convenient fast charging location, most likely a V3 supercharger, and you'll be able to plug in and just have it start charging just like a Tesla would, unfortunately, just at a slightly higher price per kilowatt hour. But I think especially for the price points they're targeting of the R2, this makes it an incredibly appealing offer. Probably one of the biggest downsides for a long time, anytime you considered buying a non-Tesla, was the road trip ability of the vehicle. It was just so much harder to activate charging stations, countless apps you'd have to download, and then usually the stalls you would go to would be broken, even though online they'd say they're working, or there's a line, or the prices are way more than the superchargers. So that's huge. But I just gotta give Rivian credit. You know, they unveiled the R2 a while ago, but it feels like they're pretty much sticking to their timeline. They said first half of 2026 for first deliveries. Personally, I think they're gonna hit it. It looks like they're on schedule, especially if they're able to build hundreds of PI builds that are already driving around before even Q4 has begun of 2025. So I hope, I could be wrong, but I hope that the first people who take delivery of the R2 really feel like they're getting a feature complete vehicle that is refined and well calibrated and deliver on that Rivian experience that so many of us love, but we can all agree it's just too darn expensive. I actually think it's quite wise of Rivian to go all in on the R2 because clearly it's becoming very clear that the R1 vehicles are not well optimized for profitability. I don't know what the sales are looking like for the quad vehicles. They're incredibly fast and capable, probably stupidly fast, but they're clearly margin chasing with those products. You know, a lot of people complained about them for not being different enough, but I think if you look at the state of the company, it makes sense why they were trying so hard to convince more and more people to spend six figures on R1 vehicles, because they've already sunk so much development cost into these battery packs, their motors, their crazy good suspension systems. But a lot of us don't need all of that crazy engineering, but Rivian was just trying to make the R1 vehicles as profitable as possible, but with slowing demand, especially at those higher price points, and the federal EV tax credit going away, which Rivian couldn't really take advantage of that much, but there were still some lease loopholes that I'm sure they were appreciating. Yeah, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's very hard to justify. But seeing how vertically integrated Rivian is becoming and how much engineering work is going into part reduction and part simplicity for the R2, I'm not surprised or mad at all that they've mentioned they're going to be at least temporarily shutting down the R1 lines for a little while, just so that everybody at the company can focus on bringing the R2 to market. Part of the truth is they probably have a ton of R1s in inventory that they can continue to sell as people need, and they likely won't increase wait times that much because not enough people are buying those R1 vehicles in the first place, which is not a huge shocker considering we know like 3 out of every 4 Rivian sold is the R1S, and the R2, like it or not, has a ton of similarities with the R1S. No, it doesn't have the crazy wishbone suspensions. No, it doesn't have a third row of seats or air suspension, but I feel like most people buying the R1S aren't necessarily buying it for all those features. A lot of them just love the Rivian ethos. They love the Rivian design. They love the Rivian software and the brand, and they just want to be part of that Rivian family. And the R2 will allow them to get into all of those things for roughly half the price once they eventually get down to making those smaller battery pack rear-wheel drive variants. I will not be surprised at all if the first R2s that end up being delivered are, you know, launch editions that are dual motor or maybe tri-motor with big battery packs and crazy fancy interiors with all the bells and whistles equipped, and they charge $60,000 or $70,000 for the first R2s. Wouldn't surprise me because there's so much demand for them, but that is still going to be technically cheaper than the base model R1S, and you're likely going to get a better overall product in regards to energy efficiency, in regards to autonomy features, in regards to those dynamically changing dials that they showcased on the steering wheel. There's a bunch of advantages I think the R2 is going to have over the R1s, plus it's just the new one. So having the charge port in the proper location and having the fancy new interior and just being an overall cooler model because it's the latest and greatest from Rivian, I think that's likely having an effect on R1 sales. Why would you spend $80,000 or $90,000 on an R1S when likely the far superior, more exciting Rivian is coming out in just a couple quarters? I don't blame you. I would wait too if I were you guys. Rivian probably doesn't want to hear that. They would rather people keep buying R1s, but how do you guys feel about the development of the R2s? Have you spotted any in your area? And do you think people are still going to be interested in buying R1 vehicles in the future? Personally, I think they should try to find a way to drastically reduce the bill of materials for the R1S, because there's still, in my opinion, going to be a ton of people that want 3-row SUVs, and the R2 is just not going to cut it. 5 seats is just not going to be enough for some of those bigger families, and the Kia EV9 appears to be selling fairly well. People like their 3 rows, so here's hoping Rivian could work on LFP battery pack for the R1S that could really bring the price down. But feel free to drop all those thoughts in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.